Look, folks, I really thought I'd never see the day, but this actually just happened. Joe Rogan just called out Donald Trump's election fraud lies on his podcast in front of his audience of millions. Now, this is incredibly significant because Joe Rogan is someone who endorsed Donald Trump in 2024, voted for him in that election, and he supported Trump all the way up until his inauguration. But recently, Rogan has been critical of Trump, especially on the immigration front, which we have covered on this channel. And it's also really important because Joe Rogan's audience is a significant demographic of voters, young men who swung the election toward Donald Trump. So him in this position of influence being critical of Trump is a pretty big deal. So I want to play this clip for you where they provide a side-by-side of Joe Rogan in the present day being critical of Donald Trump for his election fraud lies, and then they include a clip of Donald Trump on Rogan's podcast being confronted for these lies. It's a really good clip, a really good side-by-side. Before we dive into this clip, though, I want to point out that Joe Rogan is doing this podcast with a comedian, Dave Smith. This is also somebody who voted for Donald Trump, but has now turned critical of him. And recently, in an interview, he actually apologized for voting for Donald Trump and said that he should be impeached. That's the flip that you're seeing in so many MAGA celebrities who once were super MAGA and now they take a different approach. Take a look at this clip and then we'll dive into the Rogan clip after.
About coming back to the negotiating table. It's like sitting after Pearl Harbor and telling FDR, now's the time to go negotiate with the Japanese. Right. Negotiations are over now. The time for negotiations was before this. And so, yeah, Donald Trump looks, and man, I supported him this last year. I apologize for doing so. It was a bad calculation. At the time, it seemed like the right one. But he should be impeached and removed for this one. Wow. And not on some not on some ridiculous Nancy Pelosi. Of course, the Congress will never do it because they're all a bunch of, corrupt hacks.
This is the one thing they support. This is
Donald Trump should be impeached and removed for this. All of his supporters should turn on him. It's the absolute betrayal of everything that he ran and campaigned on and everything that he stood for. And I will say, despite the fact that, Donald Trump supporters have been labeled like a cult following, and that certainly is true for a percentage of his supporters, he is going to lose his coalition over this. I don't just speak for myself when I say there are a lot of us who simply will not go along with this. So it's just a devastating mistake. By the way, on top of that,
this was in relation to Donald Trump's attacks on Iran. Remember that whole thing that happened with Iran and him going after Iran, him bombing Iran? That was in relation to that. He felt betrayed over Donald Trump's policy where he said no more war. And then Donald Trump engaged in a lot of war, drone striking another country. And so far, since that moment, Dave Smith has been unequivocal in his disdain of Donald Trump, and it shows up in this clip as well. So let's finally dive into this Rogan clip, and you can see just how annoyed Rogan and Dave Smith appear with Donald Trump, of course, and his second administration. Let's start here.
So I agree with all of that. I'm just saying, once you've made these statements and your administration is in. No, I remember. It was one of the most interesting parts of your podcast with him was when you asked him about that, it was like he really didn't have anything to back it up.
If that was you or if that was me, I mean, if there was some reason why I knew that they did something and I could give you all the facts, I would have that ready for anybody because for 4 fucking years they've been telling him he's crazy for questioning the election.
Yeah.
So after 4 years, I'd have a fucking tight 10 minutes on the election where I could just rattle off at you and rock your world with it. These are the facts, Jack.
See, they're going to get into the Trump clip in a moment of when he went on Joe Rogan's podcast, but I still think, in my personal view, that Joe Rogan is being a little soft on Donald Trump here. He's saying, if that were me, I'd have a 10-minute spiel on how the election was unfair, according to Donald Trump in 2020. He's still running with that in the year 2025. That's what Joe Rogan was hoping of Donald Trump. That was never going to happen because the election wasn't stolen. The election was fair. So what Joe Rogan really should be saying here is of course Donald Trump didn't have a pitch. Of course Donald Trump didn't have any evidence or facts because those don't exist. You're trying to basically what Donald Trump was trying to do on that podcast is prove that leprechauns, unicorns, and Bigfoot exist. And they're all just roaming around us. We can't see them. That's the same level of conspiracy that Donald Trump was engaging in. So I still think that Rogan is being a little soft on Donald Trump here, but the saying, we'll take 70% instead of 0%. We want 100% from Rogan being very critical of Trump, but we'll take 70% of him, calling out these election lies. Let's continue.
You were robbed in 2020.
Yeah, totally.
How do you think you were robbed? Everybody always cuts you off. I'm going to allow.
Well, they not only cut you off. Well, what I'd rather do is we'll do it another time, and I would bring in papers that you would not believe. So many different papers. That election was so crooked. It was the most crooked election.
Okay, but give me some examples of how.
Well, let's start on the top and the easy ones.
Okay.
They were supposed to get legislative approval to do the things they did, and they didn't get it. In many cases, they didn't get it.
What things?
Anything.
Legislative approval
like for extensions of the voting, for voting earlier, for this,
right.
For all different things. By law, they had to get legislative approvals. You don't have to go any further than that. If you take a look at Wisconsin, they virtually admitted that the election was rigged, robbed, and stolen. They wouldn't give access in certain areas to the ballots because the ballots weren't signed. They weren't originals. We could go into this stuff. We could go into the ballots, or we could go into the overall. I'll give you another one.
Are you going to present this ever?
I can't. That cutoff is brutal. So, I just can't believe. Are you going to present this ever? That's a perfect encapsulation of Donald Trump's election fraud lies. I mean, that's what it's always been. And first of all, Donald Trump didn't actually provide any examples of things going wrong with the election. He said they needed legislative approval. All of these courts have the power to grant extensions for mail-in ballots to be signed or cured, for signatures to be fixed. That all goes through the court process. You don't need to go through the legislator in the state. That's just total nonsense. The other examples Donald Trump provided weren't examples. He's just making stuff up on the spot. But that's exactly what Joe Rogan is talking about there. He didn't have examples. He's never had examples. That's the MO of Donald Trump. He makes these outlandish claims. You know this. I'm preaching to the choir here. He makes these outlandish claims, and then if he gets a little bit of pushback, just a little bit, even from a friendly podcast host at the time, like Joe Rogan, he crumbles. And he goes, I don't know if I'm actually ever going to present that, because it doesn't exist. There is no evidence. And so Joe Rogan, and this side-by-side clip is genuinely fantastic, kind of comparing what he's saying now versus the interview he had then. So Joe Rogan calling this out on this podcast with Dave Smith, saying he had nothing, he had no answer, he had no evidence, truly is a good sign. And as I mentioned, I'll take 70% instead of 0%. If Joe Rogan criticizes Trump even just a little bit, I take that as a win. As somebody who works in the content creation space and sees how Republicans misuse it and misuse folks like Joe Rogan, I'll take the win. So anyway, just had to show you this clip of Joe Rogan. I think it's fantastic. I will leave the video there. Thank you so much for watching. It truly means the world. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, drop a like on the video, comment down below. Let me know what you think about the story. I'm always interested to hear from you. And as I always say, I greatly appreciate you, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your day.